Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was posted by a user named I Love Waffles in the True Off My Chest subreddit. The post is titled, "Brother Framed Me for Essay 8 Years Ago." Now, the truth comes out. Hello Reddit, I'm using a throwaway account. I wanted some insights and guidance on the predicament I am in and how to navigate it further. Sorry for any mistakes, I'm just trying to put this out there. A bit about myself. I am the younger of 2 siblings. I'll go as chronologically as possible so you have all the details available. My brother Henry was always the golden child in the family. Growing up, he could do no wrong. Some of the more obvious displays of favoritism towards him were when he got bad grades in school. My parents would cheer him up and work with him to improve, while I always received the "I am so disappointed with this result" treatment, even though I managed to secure a decent score. For his high school graduation, he received a new car and a big party, while I got the equivalent of $500 and a pat on the back. He wasn't a bad brother, but most of the time we did our own thing. I didn't complain much, but I felt I had to move out and explore things on my own as well. For the next few years, I went to college in a different city and earned my MBA in 5 years. I managed to land a job back in my hometown. During this time, my contact with the family was minimal except for birthdays and holidays. My brother was never the brightest, he barely managed to get through high school, dropped out of college, and my parents helped him set up a small hardware shop so he could get on his feet. I was happy for him, but I had my own life. I also had a girlfriend, Jenny, whom I met in college and who was from the same city. When we returned home, we moved in together. She found a job soon enough, and we started focusing on our lives and each other. It was during the holidays of 2006 that I introduced my family to her. They were surprisingly warm and receptive towards her and made me feel more love than I had experienced in the past 22 years of my life. I noticed my brother looking at her during that entire gathering, but thought nothing of it. Since then, he started frequenting my apartment a bit too often. We went from meeting each other once every 3 months to almost daily very quickly. At that point, I had to draw boundaries and tell him that he was welcome occasionally, but that I did not like his presence in my place daily since he came during the evenings when Jenny and I were both at home trying to unwind after a hectic day at work. This erupted into a huge fight with my parents. In the end, he apologized and said that he would not bother me anymore. From then on, he only came once a month on weekends, which I was okay with, and made attempts to make small talk with Jenny, which was still fine by me as it never went beyond that. Things continued this way for some time, and in 2009, I proposed to her and announced our engagement to the entire family. My parents were happy for me, but my brother just shook my hand and left the small party I had organized for this occasion. After that, I didn't see him for a couple of weeks. We got married in 2010. During that time, I noted that my brother had a +1 at the wedding and told us he was dating her. I'll call her Kate for this story. I thought maybe now he could finally move past whatever feelings he had for Jenny and focus on his own life. They moved really fast too, getting married almost 9 months later in 2011. Our marriage was going great. We had our first daughter Alice in 2011 and our second daughter Sarah in 2013. However, my brother's marriage did not progress as they had hoped and they separated in 2012. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Kate messaged me that Henry was obsessed with Jenny and that this was the biggest reason for their separation. I apologized to her and wished her the best. I also talked to Jenny about her interactions with Kate. She told me that Kate had always been a bit cold and distant towards her from the beginning. I decided to confront my brother in front of my family and asked him why he was destroying his life because of his obsession with my wife. He was blindsided by that question and denied everything. We had a massive argument that basically ended with me forgiving my brother and telling him that he was no longer welcome in my house. Both my parents and Jenny talked to me and convinced me that no matter what, he was still family. So for everyone's sake, I decided to be amicable. It was then that it felt like he was genuinely working on himself, and we went on with our lives. Fast forward to 2015, I can still recall that day vividly. It was the 25th of July, and I was running multiple errands. My wife took both our kids to see their grandparents. It was sometime after lunch that I got a call from my father telling me to come to their home with a lot of anger in his tone. As soon as I entered, I noticed a lot of tension in the air. My wife was a crying mess, and my parents were trying to console her. Some of my extended family members were there as well. I asked what happened, only to be called a sexual assault perpetrator by my parents. I was shocked and confused. They claimed that at a party I went to a couple of weeks back, I had assaulted a girl and then texted her not to tell anyone, otherwise there would be consequences. I had known this girl Amanda for some time. We went to high school together and she was part of the larger friend group I occasionally hung out with. According to her, after the party, which was at a club, I followed her to her car and assaulted her. She shared screenshots of the alleged conversation with my wife and told her this entire story. My father slapped me hard and my parents told me they never wanted to see my face again. Jenny was angry and said we were done. I tried to convince all of them that I never did that, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. I was basically kicked out of their house and told that neither Jenny nor the kids would be returning, and my father would be coming over to take their belongings to my apartment. When my father came, I begged and pleaded, but he packed a couple of bags and told me never to contact them again, threatening to personally hand me over to the police if I did. By evening, Henry had shared the screenshots and all the details in our extended family WhatsApp group, from which I was unanimously kicked. In the next few days, I had people from my friend group calling me to say they were disgusted with me and never wanted to contact me again. I was a mess during that time. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't even work properly. My boss also heard the rumors going around, but couldn't do much until he saw some police action against me. He advised me to leave the organization on my own to keep my record intact, and assured me that he would ensure I wouldn't have to serve my notice period. I tried to argue my case, but he told me that if the police came knocking on my door, he would be kicked out anyway. Given the gravity of the situation, he warned that I wouldn't receive severance pay and my record would be tarnished. I grudgingly agreed to his request and left the organization in the following days. In mid-August, while I was still wallowing in my misery, I received 2 documents from the court. One was a letter of disownment and the other was divorce papers. I was quite drunk, but I went to my parents' place anyway, only for my brother to come and beat me up, telling me that I was a disgrace to the family and that it was good I had been disowned. By the time he was done with me, I had blood coming from my face and could barely stand. My parents and my wife looked at me from afar but did nothing. After some time, I managed to get myself up, a crying mess, and realized that I had lost everything and everyone I knew. I stayed holed up in my apartment during the divorce proceedings, which went as amicably as possible. Since I was jobless and my now ex-parents stated that they would pay for the child, I didn't have to pay child support or any alimony. By January 20th, 16, I was divorced, but trying to pick up the pieces of what had once been my life was hard. During this time, I considered confronting Amanda, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it could make matters worse for me due to the women-centric laws in my country. One phone call could lead to 5 to 6 years in jail. In February 20th, 16, I got into a major accident and spent a good part of 5 weeks in recovery. The staff informed me that they contacted my emergency number, which was still Jenny at that point. She hung up and no one showed up for me. Once I recovered, I realized that I had spent through a significant portion of my savings and needed to get back on my feet, if not for anything else, then to have a roof over my head. However, I recognized that I wouldn't be able to do anything in the place where I was at that moment. So I sold all my furniture, paid off my remaining dues for the rented accommodation, and decided to start from scratch in a different location. I moved to a city 2 hours away and tried to find a job for some time, but had no luck. During this period, I also drank excessively, and thoughts of ending my life became recurring. Waking up from nightmares in a cold sweat almost became routine. For 4 months, this continued until I ran into an old acquaintance, James, from college. He had been the quiet kid back then and didn't really talk to anyone. Seeing him after so many years felt odd as he spotted me out of the crowd and called my name. We greeted each other and talked about our lives for a bit. When I mentioned that I was in the city looking for a job, he told me he had just quit his job and was planning on setting up a management consulting firm of his own. He then invited me for drinks later on. After discussing our professional lives extensively, he offered me an opportunity to work with him as he needed a couple of people who knew their stuff. At that point, I thought working hard would help get my mind off these dark thoughts. So I agreed, but told him that I wanted to meet him and his team first before we moved forward. 2 days later, he introduced me to another guy, Derek, and told me that currently it would be just the 3 of us going forward. I shook hands with Derek and told them that before they proceeded further, I had something to say. I then proceeded to spill the beans on everything that had happened to me during that time and how I was disowned and divorced because of it, with tears coming through in between. James and Derek told me that they felt sorry for me, but also mentioned that if there was no criminal record on my person, then there would be no issue. I stated that the police never never came to my house, and they were relieved. James did mention that to be on the safer side, he was going to ask someone to run a full background check, and I understood his position and agreed. During this time, I was living in a rundown place that I rented to minimize my expenses. I waited patiently for 2 weeks, but was still looking for jobs in other places in case things didn't work out. 2 weeks later, James called me and we met up later that day. He stated my record was clean of any assault and welcomed me to the team. After that, I threw myself into my work and started therapy sessions. On Derek's advice, I also joined a gym and vented a lot of my frustration on the punching bag, going from an average 70 kilograms to a buff 98 kilograms. Derek and I became gym bros, and I basically looked at him as an older brother since he was essentially Henry's age. By the end of 2018, I had a good amount of control back in my life. The consulting firm took off and the money rolled in. I rented out a nice apartment in a decent neighborhood. The band-aid also came off to an extent, and I realized I needed to take some necessary steps to move on. I went to a courthouse and officially changed my last name on record. I adopted Derek's last name after he and his parents gave their go-ahead, as they saw me as a nice guy and involved me in many of their family functions, including making me the best man at Derek's wedding, a way of thanking them as well. I tried dating, but it never worked out for me due to my emotional issues until I started dating Kim in 2019. She was half Korean and half Italian. I met her at a coffee place where I picked up my coffee and occasionally sat. She worked behind the counter. We saw each other only during orders, but once when Derek and I were there, he noticed she was constantly looking at me and told me I should ask her out. I approached somewhat hesitant and asked her out for drinks later that day. We had a nice date, and she said she hoped we could see each other again. I knew this would likely go the same way my other dates had, where I told them about my past and they ran off. However, during our second date, I decided to tell her about my past before we went further. I wanted her to make an informed choice. I told her that I never had and never could think about doing such a thing to anyone, and that I was still struggling to move on from the aftermath. I wanted her to know what she was getting into before we considered going on further dates. A couple of days later, Kim called and asked to meet. We met at the same coffee place where she worked, and she told me she trusted me and wanted to give it a shot. At that point, I was skeptical and even cried a bit because I couldn't believe I could find a bit of normalcy restored in my life. We went out on a few dates and really enjoyed each other's company. It felt like I was finally able to start healing. I took my first vacation in years with her to Europe, and we had a great time overall. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, we remained in contact over the phone and FaceTime. When things regained some level of normalcy in the latter half of the year, she asked if she could move in with me, and I agreed. She had been let go from her coffee shop and was trying her luck with job hunting. She was an amazing cook, so I suggested that maybe she could set up a place and get into the food business. By mid-2021, with the financial backing of her parents, she had set up a cloud kitchen that delivered food to nearby areas. Both our lives were going great. I still had a lot of emotional issues though. I no longer had thoughts of ending my life, but the nightmares still continued occasionally. In February 20th, 2023, Kim announced that she was pregnant, and a range of mixed emotions washed over me. From being overjoyed at starting all over again to crying for the loss of what I once had. I was all over the place. Kim comforted me, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. A couple of days later, I proposed to her, and she was overjoyed. It felt like everything was finally moving toward a point where I could have some semblance of peace in my life. We were set to be married, and all the preparations were in full swing for my wedding in mid-June this year. I apologize for the long post, but I needed to provide all the information possible for you to understand what a roller coaster things have been for me. At the end of May, I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I could hear someone crying. She said, "Hi, it's Amanda." I instantly recognized that voice and hung up, trying to hold back my anger. Kim was with me and saw my face. She came over concerned. I was trying to suppress my mix of tears and anger and told her who it was. When the call came in again, this time Kim picked up the phone and put it on speaker. There was a guy on the other side who explained that he was Amanda's fiance and that she wanted to come clean about what she had said back then. She got on the phone and kept apologizing over and over again while crying continuously. Kim did most of the talking as I became a sobbing mess, unsure of what I wanted to do. Kim suggested that they would call back later. She immediately called Derek over. He listened patiently as Kim explained what had happened. He gave me a hug and advised that we should set up a meeting at a lawyer's office with her confession so that it could help in case of any future issues. I called my lawyer and explained everything to him. He said he would set up a meeting in his office and gave me a time and date. I called Amanda and told her that she needed to come over to my lawyer's office so we could discuss it there. 3 days later, we met at his office. Amanda looked half dead. Her expressions were hollow and her fiancé was the only person with her. My lawyer set up the meeting with a camera to record everything. I asked him to mediate and I invited Kim to come with me. We sat across the room and she started to explain in detail what had happened back then. A lot was said and discussed, but here's the crux of it. She and my brother had been dating in 2015, but no one knew. He was the person behind the entire assault plan. She went along because she really loved him and would do anything for him. He got a new phone and stole my profile picture from my WhatsApp number back then, and they used it to create fake screenshots by chatting back and forth with Amanda. I went from crying to being filled with rage. I can honestly say that if it wasn't for Kim, I might have been charged with assault. Kim was pretty furious and worked up as well, partially due to the pregnancy, and she verbally lashed out at Amanda, though my lawyer tried to maintain civility. It was clear that Kim was extremely angry. She went further to tell Amanda's fiancé that if he still marries this human garbage, then he deserves what's coming to him. Fighting back anger and tears, I asked them why they were coming out and telling me this now. Her fiancé Mark came forward and explained. He said that they were pretty drunk a couple of weeks back, and she blurted out how she helped an ex destroy a marriage. That stuck with him, and after asking non-stop and pushing her, she finally came clean to him. It was then that he pushed her to own up to her mistakes if she wanted peace in her life. Apparently, after she helped Henry, he started becoming cold and distant with her and eventually broke it off 6 months later. At that point, she felt terrible but was too scared to come clean and spent a lot of time in therapy trying to work through her issues. After everything was laid out on the table, my lawyer stepped in and said, "Let's take a 30-minute break and meet back again." Amanda and Mark stepped out, and our lawyer discussed that if I wanted, he could go after her and my brother for defamation. The evidence available was more than enough for me to do what I wanted. I was feeling a lot of rage, but I decided I didn't want this to spoil the wedding, and whatever I wanted to do would have to wait until after everything was done. I told Amanda that I would be in contact with her, but for now, I didn't want her telling anyone else. I didn't want any drama from my ex-family to impact my wedding. After that meeting, Kim hugged me and told me that she was right in trusting her gut, and now she felt like a weight had lifted off her shoulders. I shared her sentiment. We had a small wedding with both James and Derek being the best men and a 3-week-long honeymoon covering Europe. It was an amazing time for both of us. Thankfully, I was able to work through what I had heard, and Derek suggested that I should put this on the back of my mind. It didn't spoil the honeymoon too much, though the nightmares were coming more frequently than before during that time, and Kim was always there to support me. I also had a discussion with my therapist, who told me that I would need to confront my ex-family sooner or later, if not for anything else, then for closure. After thinking a lot about all that had happened, I decided to reach out to Amanda in July and told her what she needed to do. I told her that I would be taking legal action based on her statement, but if she wanted to avoid being financially ruined, she needed to follow what I told her next. She needed to talk to Jenny alone and explain everything she had told us back in the lawyer's office. She was crying while listening to me and told me that Mark had left her. I told her that I wished I could feel sorry for her, but I don't. Then I stated that karma hits everyone hard. It hit her, and now it's coming for my brother. A couple of days later, I received a text. It was from Jenny. Despite being blocked, I'd been sending her birthday wishes, holiday greetings, and messages on both our daughters' birthdays over text. This was the first message I had received in 8 years. She basically asked if we could talk. I didn't want to be alone when I had this conversation, so I told her I would call her in a few hours. I reached home and was with Kim when the call took place. I could immediately hear Jenny sobbing uncontrollably for a while before she told me how sorry she was and how terrible she felt. Somehow, I was able to maintain my composure during this time. I told her that it hurt terribly knowing that she thought so little of me that she so easily fell into Henry's trap. I asked about my girls and she said they were doing well. Then I asked when she had met Amanda. She said she met her 2 days ago. It took a long time to process how wrong she was and how quickly she had moved away from me. She immediately brought it to the attention of my ex-parents, and they were just as stunned. They all wanted to contact me, but she said she wanted to connect first and apologize. I told her that what she had done was beyond hurtful. I asked what had happened to the golden child, and she stated that he had been kicked out of the house. I chuckled a bit. She told me she had married Henry a year after the divorce was finalized, as he was the one who supported her through this. Suddenly, it all made sense. It looked like he never got over her. She also mentioned that she had a daughter with him. After our discussion, I basically told her what was going to happen and detailed what I wanted. First, I wanted her to reach out to all my former extended family so they would be aware of what a piece of work he is. Secondly, I made it clear that I only wanted to co-parent my 2 girls and had no intention of reconciling with her beyond what it takes to maintain a relationship with my daughters. Thirdly, I would text her the date and time when I wanted to meet my ex-parents in person. After that, I hugged Kim. Knowing she was pregnant and that her mood could be all over the place, I kept my emotions in check. But I guess she was crying for both of us and we fell asleep on the bed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was shut off. When I put it on charge, I noticed a barrage of messages coming through. I had over 50 missed calls and hundreds of messages. I was also added to the family group chat where every single one of them was apologizing. Over the next few days, I started receiving messages from some friends who were apologizing for what had happened and how they jumped the gun on everything. The only reply I gave was in the family group chat. Since I had been disowned almost 8 years ago, I considered myself an outsider in this group and wished to remain so. Whether or not I forgave them would happen on my terms and timeline, not theirs. I further told them not to add me back here and left the group. Some family members tried to call me out by messaging me that they were disappointed in my reaction. I shut them down by saying they were not in a position to judge me after being so quick to assume what happened and that they should not contact me again unless I reached out first. A couple of weeks later, I called Jenny and told her that I wanted her to bring my girls over for the weekend so that I could meet them properly. Kim, being as adamant and feisty as she is, said she wanted to meet her stepdaughters as well. We argued a lot. It was mostly me telling her that since she was pregnant, she needed to take care of herself, but the Asian in her was pretty adamant, so eventually I gave in. We met at a public park. Jenny looked a bit disheveled, but seemed to have made an effort to look as good as possible for this meeting. There, I saw Alice and Sarah for the first time in 8 years. They had grown so much. The only memories I had of them were on my phone, as I had been pretty much blocked from all social media and everywhere else. Jenny came crying, trying to hug me, but I put both my hands up to decline. I then introduced her to Kim as my wife, and she broke down into a sobbing mess in the park. Kim came forward to comfort her, and we sat down in a nearby spot. I grabbed both my girls and cried. My girls had never been told about me until recently, and they were pretty conflicted since they only knew Henry as their father. Seeing me suddenly brought out some emotions. There was a lot of crying and talking, and by the evening, we exchanged what had happened in our lives. She told me that she got married to Henry a year after our divorce was finalized. He took care of her for the first few years, but after that, things settled down. He still couldn't grow his landscaping business to a point where it was profitable, and then COVID-19 forced him to shut it down. His parents were now dipping into their savings in an attempt to make ends meet, and he never bothered to start something new despite his parents urging him to do so. She said she was filing for divorce from Henry because she couldn't stand the sight of him. I told her she was free to do what she wanted. It had nothing to do with me. I shared some details about moving forward. Essentially, I wanted Alice and Sarah to attend family therapy sessions with me so we could heal together. They had been robbed of their real father, and it was time to make it right. I wanted to be a part of their lives. I also wanted them to spend weekends with me and Kim, but I mentioned that would have to wait since we had a child of our own coming, and I wanted to focus all my energy on that for now. Lastly, she mentioned that my parents wanted to reach out to me. I corrected her, saying they were anything but my parents. I still had the letter of disownment they sent along with the divorce papers, and I wanted nothing to do with them. However, both she and Kim stated that it would help me get closure from them, so I agreed. I told her that I would let her know when and where I wanted to meet them. I booked her a hotel and told her that I wanted her to stay in this city for the night so that I could spend more time with my girls, with tomorrow being Sunday. We spent that Sunday together as well. This time, I took them around the sights in the city, and we really enjoyed our time together. Before leaving, both of them gave me a warm hug, and I told them I would see them next week. I assured Jenny that she didn't need to drive the girls for the family therapy sessions. I would come over to them. I received a good recommendation from my therapist for a therapist in that city, and we had a productive first introductory session. However, the therapist spelled it out. Sooner or later, they would need to know what my ex-brother did. I told her they would find out in due time. She suggested that I write out my experiences here and get some outside perspectives on my situation as well. I can honestly say that if it wasn't for Derek pushing me, I might not have made it to this point. This brings me to opening this forum for you. What should I do from here? I plan to confront my ex-parents sooner or later, and despite calling them ex, I still have emotions and feelings for them. I'm not sure if that makes sense. How do I deal with Henry? I don't think I ever want to see his face again, but should I go after him with a defamation suit knowing he has a daughter with my ex? Anything I do to him might impact her as well. If you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. User Dresden Mouse said, meet your parents, but at the first comment about being the bigger person in your brother's situation, get up and leave. He robbed you of your family and your children. Now karma is coming for him. He is an unemployed leech. If you go after him, it won't affect his daughter, as he has nothing to give her. User Agitated Phil said, legal action against the brother and Amanda. She was just as guilty in this as him. You would not be taking anything away from his daughter because he's already an unemployed leech. He doesn't have anything to give her, and honestly, she would be better off without him in her life. This next post was made in the same subreddit by a user named Manufacture Cookie. The post is titled, my ex told me he'd take his own life if I left. I did it anyway. They found his body yesterday. I dated my ex for 2 years. Worst 2 years of my life. There were some good times when he was smart, funny, and even kind. He was charming and courteous to everyone around us. He was friends with pretty much everyone, but he would hit me when he got angry, drunk, or just had a bad day and needed someone to take it out on. Our friends think I'm a klutz who kept tripping and falling or bumping into doors or falling off my bike. That's what I told them and they believed me. He gaslighted me to make me doubt my own sanity. He called me fat and pushed me to diet to the point of a borderline eating disorder. Even so, I loved him. I wanted to leave, but every time I brought it up, he'd have some excuse. He'd beg for my forgiveness, promise to get therapy, give up drinking, pretty much tell me what I wanted to hear. He promised to change and never did. Last month I told him I was leaving and he told me he'd be so sad he'd kill himself. I fell for it and stayed. Last week after he beat me up particularly badly, I tried to leave and he said the same thing. I thought he was bluffing, I really did. He'd never made an attempt before, never self-harmed, always seemed to like himself too much to do anything like that. So I left. Packed my stuff and went to a motel. Yesterday, after a week of not showing up for his shift, his job contacted the police who conducted a welfare check. He didn't answer the door, so they contacted his mom, who told them she hadn't seen him. She let them into the apartment using her spare key, and they found that he'd hanged himself from the ceiling fan in our bedroom. His mom is devastated, and our mutual friends are too. They never knew what he did to me. They thought he was a good man. I don't have the heart to tell them. I expected to feel something when I heard the news, but I don't. I feel kind of empty, but I'm not sad. I feel like a monster. He may have hurt me, but he was still human, and shouldn't I feel sad about the death of a fellow human? I don't know. I guess I just needed to tell someone about this. I can't tell anyone. I'm the one who caused his death. I basically murdered him, and I don't even feel anything. Is this what it means to be a psychopath? User OB4L said, this was his final abusive act toward you. He wanted to hurt you and keep you tethered to him for the rest of your life. This wasn't your fault. Please find someone to talk to. User Profession Sanity said, I think a part of you might be in shock. He was abusive and wasn't going to change. This is all on him. Eventually, the pain will hit. It would be a very good idea for you to get a therapist. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I'm glad your abuser can't hurt you anymore. User No Switch said, I highly recommend seeking out therapy of some kind, even if it is online. That's a lot to carry on someone's heart and mind. Regardless, it isn't your fault and nobody is blaming you. I can only imagine the pain and what ifs you are going through in your mind. I'm sorry this happened to you.